final reminder article, Solana, my internet was burnt out. It's always just a few seconds.
Good evening, ladies and gents, and welcome to another Q8 pilot stream. It is 2100 hours local time, 1800 Zulu, and today, ladies and gents, we have a very special guest here on the Q8 pilot channel, someone who really needs no introduction in the flight simulation world. Please join me in welcoming Tom Kyler, the lead IXEG developer and a very good friend of mine. Tom, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the stream. I'm very glad to have you here, and thank you very much for making the time to be with us.
Thank you, Osama. I'm very glad to be here and very honored.
Excellent. So the IXEG 737 has released for xplane 12 recently. I know that there has been a lot of talk about this release, some positives, some negatives. And I'm sure that folks on the stream this evening are wanting to ask a lot of questions. But I want to begin, Tom, with asking you on how you started with IXEG. How did this idea sort of materialize? And I know that it has materialized a very long time ago. So the IXEG was available for xplane 10. So it's been years, almost 7, 8 years now. So can you just let us know how you started with the project and where we are today?
Absolutely. So I've been involved with xplane since probably 1998. So let me give a little bit of background about how I got into xplane. So I was a Macintosh user, and I wanted a flight simulator, and so xplane was the only one available, and that was around 1998. So I got into xplane kind of as a hobby at that point in time, and I was also a pretty prolific 3D modeler. I enjoyed doing that, so I was combining the two. I thought, well, hey, maybe I can model 3D for xplane. But back then, that was version 7, and the modeling tools were not very stable. The formats were changing all the time. And then Ben Supnick came in for xplane version 8, and he standardized all the tools that we use today, the 3D formats and things of this nature. So during that time, I got to know Ben reasonably well, and I started modeling for xplane as a hobby. And the MU2 was the first plane that I started playing with, mostly for my own enjoyment. And then as I got a little bit better with that, things transpired in life in 2008, which we had the kind of big market crash. I ended up going to work for Laminar for 4 years till 2012. And at that point in time, I became really familiar with obviously how to model a lot of stuff for xplane. So there was another individual named Niels Danielson who did the BK-117, and Niels was probably one of the best artists for xplane. And he and I had been working on our own project separately, and we were what we call kind of full stack developers. We were doing the flight model, the 3D modeling, and all the coding as well. And it became quite a huge workload for us to do a high quality plane ourselves. So Niels and I got together and said, hey, let's get together and let's do an aircraft. So we got together and we started working on a Cessna Caravan, and we actually got quite far on the Caravan. And right in the middle of that project was when Microsoft announced that they were canceling the FSX development. And it didn't take us long to realize that as xplane continued to move, and with me working for Laminar, I was kind of on the inside. I knew what it was capable of, and I knew where it was going, so I knew that it had real potential. So Niels and I got together and we decided, hey, let's do an airliner. It's going to take a long time, and we really should get started on it. So at the same time, Cameron from X Aviation, he was running a website called the xplane freeware project, and Cameron really liked airliners. And there was another individual who was participant in that forum named Morton Melhus, and he was kind of a flight model guy. So we got a hold of Morton to develop our flight model, and then Niels and I were going to share duties, and we still didn't have a plane at that point. We were thinking about doing a 737 NG, but there was a freeware project at the time called, well, I think it was the X737 project, and they were doing an NG, and they were making really good progress, and we really didn't want to step on their toes, so we said, well, let's let them do that. At the same time all this was going on, Jan, who's now with the IXEG, and everybody knows the Captain Jan, he was a big fan of helicopters, and he had bought Niels's BK-117 and became familiar with Niels' work. So somehow Niels brought Jan into the fold, and the next thing you know, there's four of us together. We're wanting to do an aircraft. Jan was a 737-300 captain at the time. So it just kind of fell into our lap in that way. And so we all got together and said, hey, let's do this. And we managed to bring in a fifth individual who had some experience programming in FMS. So we were 5 when we got started. And that would have been 2010, I believe, that we started. And we all met in Germany. All flew over there, the 5 of us, and we talked through the project and things of this nature. And we kind of all went home in our separate ways, and then we started work. And I think that was 2010, and maybe sometime in the first year is when the first video and previews and screenshots came out. And we were off and running on the 737-300.
Wow, that's quite a story. I didn't know that you've worked for Laminar Research. That's very interesting to know. And so the IXEG, when it came out, Tom, was without a doubt one of the highest fidelity study level aircraft. I remember when I purchased the aircraft, with the Captain Ray's manual to learn the aircraft, and everything that was in the manual by Captain Ray was in the IXEG. So I was able to perform all the tests. I was able to operate the FMC like it should. By today's standards, where do you place the IXEG from your own perspective? Where we have PMDG, we have the Phoenix A320, we have many aircraft for X-plane as well, such as the Fearless 747, the excellent Fly JSIM range of aircraft. Where do you place the IXEG 737 in this fleet of high fidelity aircraft?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question. Do you want the simple answer or the long answer, or maybe the simple answer and then the long answer?
Okay, that works.
That works. All right. I haven't really looked at some of those other products, and I'll get into why I'm going to rate it the way I'm going to rate it here in just a moment. So I can't say how it compares to those other products, but if I had to do a relativity index to say, okay, let's take all the competing products and average them together and give that a value of, say, 0, baseline. Is the IXEG higher or lower? Without using those to some, it's really hard for me to say. I guess I would say it's probably equal from an aggregate point of view, and that's going to lead into my long answer, because I think the IXEG team and myself think a little bit different about when it comes to rating products. So one of the things that's is I've been in the flight sim. Well, actually, let me give you a bit of context. I myself am usually not an airliner guy. There are people who really enjoy the procedural aspects, the cognitive aspects of operating an airliner. My brother, for example, he owns it, he loves it, and he doesn't even know how to operate it because he enjoys the visceral aspects of the aircraft, which is just being around airplanes and things of this nature. So the way I approach any project and say, okay, how does it compare? The reason why I said it was a loaded question is because for us to do a product, we have to really say what makes a product feel real. And that leads into this concept of fidelities. So fidelity without a preceding adjective is kind of a vague term. So you have aural fidelity, you know, how well does something sound compared? You've got visual fidelity, which is further broken down into geometric and lighting and color. There are three elements to visual. So you can have something that's, you know, say colored correctly, but it's not shaped correctly. You could have something that shaped correctly, and but it's not colored correctly. Then you can have something that's shaped correctly, colored correctly, but it's not lit correctly. So there's three elements to that. Then you have, when it comes to, say, systems fidelity, then that gets lumped into what I call dynamic fidelity. In other words, things you see with your eyes. When you look at the needles and things move, or you hit a button and you expect to see a light or a needle move, then it's the animation on screen that your eyes are feeding your brain that says, oh, that's exactly the way the real thing is. And so as humans, we have this real, you know, innate ability to just kind of understand what's real and what's not, because we've seen so many dynamic phenomenon in life. So having broken down a simulation, okay, it's fair to say we're trying to simulate a reality, a real aircraft. So if you can somewhat define reality in terms of these fidelities, then you have a measure to work towards in any given area. But then what that leads to then is a product or a series of products, whether it's ours, Felis, or anybody else, where they may excel in one aspect of fidelity, but say not another. Say their systems are really good, their FMS is good, but their sounds aren't as good, or maybe their textures look good, but their lighting's not quite right. The shadows, things of this nature. So one of the things that I've been big on so for myself, what got me started in this is no matter how good the systems got, whether, you know, it was either PMDG or anybody else, I still never felt like I was sitting in this airplane. So I was a guy that came from 3D, so I was really big into lighting and the visual texturing. It's like if I can't look at it and feel that it's real, then I'm just not happy in the sim. Doesn't matter how good the simulation may be. So that's a good example of, let's say, one user who loves the systems and the cognition aspect and the challenge of flying a flight, whereas me, if it doesn't look right, I can't even enjoy that. So when you start adding up all the flight sim customers around the world, there's this huge, you know, breadth to the things that people enjoy about the sim. So case in point, one of my tests that I do when I look at products, I always look down into the footwell, which is a trick, kind of a trick, and say, okay, is it dark in the footwell? Because in the real aircraft, it gets very, very dark in there. But a lot of people, when they texture it, you know, they'll texture the color, but it'll be bright down there, and that'll tell your brain it just doesn't look right. So that was very important to me. And then, of course, sounds were very important. If I didn't feel like I could just sit in the plane, not touch anything, and sound like I was sitting there and look like I was sitting there, then I wasn't happy. So that was my particular focus. Jan is very kind of systems oriented. So coming all the way back to your original question with the IXEG, I think, let's start with the obvious. With the non-FMS related systems, I think we are at a pretty high level. I think visually and aurally we're at a very high level. You can get so close to kind of reality, and then it doesn't matter how much further you go. It's going to look the same. Now I noticed in a lot of your streams, you like to get the camera real close. So one of the things we did early on, keeping in mind it was a 10-year-old product, performance was a consideration. We kind of made the idea that said, okay, the camera, you know, can get about a virtual 8 to 12 inches away. Any closer than that, we're not going to try to go high resolution, because when the camera's at the normal view, those pixels through anti-aliasing and filtering, they get wiped out. So they're not even being used, but they are in your memory, so they can hog performance. So so we made a conscientious decision to say, okay, this is kind of, in the world of simulation, it's only practical to get the camera, say, X close to a surface. And that became our our demarcation line for us to calculate what our pixel resolution and things of this nature was. So I think visually, at least in the cockpit, in Arley, we're very high up there. I think the non FMS related systems, I think, are very high fidelity compared to everybody else. There are probably elements to that most people still haven't even discovered. For instance, I remember when we did like the landing gear, if you fail the hydraulics, you can release the landing gear, and the landing gear will come out based on G load and a certain amount of assumed hydraulic pressure. And most people probably will never try that. Our hydraulic power transfer units, something else we simulate that probably nobody knows about. The electrical simulation, I think, is probably one of the ones I'm pretty proud about. It just works, so nobody ever really notices. But when Jan and I were developing, but we would have all these problems. We thought we would have a bug, and then come to find out that we had disabled something that had ended up disabling another bus that a particular piece of equipment was attached to. And so that it wasn't that it was a bug, is that we weren't operating the aircraft terribly fine. Externally, our 3D model's got a long way to go, but once again, we did that, back in 2010. It's held up remarkably well, but it is low res. X-Plane 10 makes it look good if you're more than 20 meters away, which is great for flybys and screens. But if you're doing a walk around, not so much.
Well,
but of
Tom,
course,
we have with us a fellow content creator in a real-world Airbus pilot. I don't know if you know V1 Simulations. He just popped into the stream. V1,
okay.
How are you doing, my friend? Welcome aboard. Before I started streaming, my morning routine would be to brew coffee and start a cold and dark IXEG flight. It is one of the only add-ons that I ever felt. It was really sitting in the flight deck. That is from a real-world pilot.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's where we started. So.
Yeah. We do have a few questions, Tom. So one of the questions was, are you guys going to bring back the weight and balance through the menu like it used to be?
The answer to that is yes, and probably sooner than people think.
Oh, great.
There is a reason for that, and hopefully in the course of our stream, maybe we can talk about that. So
all right, perfect.
Everything in the IXEG history has as cause and effect, rhyme and reason to it. So.
Excellent. All right, I'm just going to brief everyone here on our flight very quickly, as Tom was telling us. Very, very interesting to hear, your thoughts. There are a lot more questions I want to ask you, Tom. So hopefully the stream allows and your time allows. But very quickly, guys, today we are going to be taking Norwegian Airlines flight 904 service from Oslo to Billund in Norway. Our approximate flight time today is about 1 hour or so. We are going to be departing. We're going to be cruising at a final cruise altitude of 34,000 feet. Flight route today is a departure through 19er right. SimBrief keeps changing these. You can see that it says it's not used because it's got a tailwind, but it's 2 knots, so that's all right. We'll just take it. We're gonna go through the VIPA 6 Delta departure through the VIPA transition into Papa 615, then exit at Ritzy, direct to Loksa, direct to Billund, and we're gonna be performing an ILS approach runway 27. The weather at our current position is not bad. Let me remove this here and just zoom out and show you what these through the satellite map. You can see that as we arrive into our destination, there is a little bit of a cloud cover there, which should make for an interesting approach into Billund runway 27. Other than that, yeah, let's go ahead and fire up the aircraft. We're ready to push back. I think the AP is started. We're going to turn on the fuel pumps here, and everything here is ready for engine start and pushback. And that brings me to the sounds of the IXEG. First of all, the engine sounds are amazing, especially when you're doing a flyby. Are those real sounds from the real aircraft, Tom?
Some of the sounds are from the real aircraft. Most of the internal sounds are from the real aircraft, which Jan was able to help us obtain
Ground to
those.
cockpit,
But
please show me where you want to
surprisingly,
go.
Niels, he synthesized a lot of those sounds. So Niels, he's from Sweden, and so that's a lot of people from that area are kind of very big into techno and music producing, and Niels was one of those guys. So he knew quite a bit about synthesizing and generating sound. So uh, Niels
Ground
was
to
very
cockpit,
much an
tow is
artist in
driving
the
up.
classical sense. That's one of the reasons the textures look so good nowadays. People may use Substance Painter, but Niels was getting in there with his hand brush and Photoshop and hand painting this as if it was a work of art, which is one reason I'm kind of so reluctant to touch it. He did such a good job. So, but the sounds, he synthesized a lot of those. And at the time, the way sounds were done at an X-plane, we had basic sound files and you could replace them. So we had access, when we started programming, we had access to the open AL engine. But we really didn't have too many spatial features, and layering sounds to play at the same time, you really couldn't
Okay,
do
all
with
doors and
X-plane.
hatches
So
are closed.
I
Ready to
set
cruise.
about writing I call it a sound engine, but it's not a sound engine in the sense of, say, OpenAL or Fmod. But what it is a spatial engine, and what it is it's an API. In other words, we're coding in a certain language. So I wrote kind of this spatial sound engine that manages the sounds pitch and gain, which is the most fundamental elements of sounds. You manage, those two elements, you can create just about any sound. And my goal was to give Niels a tool in software where he could go in and type in something like, the engine roar is a new sound, and then the engine flyby, and so he could
Connected and
layer
bypass
about 8
pin
or
inserted.
9 sounds
Release parking
together
brake.
and manipulate each one sound gain to create the sound that he wanted. So
Starting
that was
switchback,
that
and
was
you
a
may
huge
start
boost.
engine.
And I remember there was a flight sim conference somewhere up north in New Hampshire, maybe it was, or Vermont. I think it was New Hampshire. Some people may remember those. We would fly in, and X-plane, the Laminar crew was there, and they'd been working on Fmod, and I didn't know that. So I just remember Chris Serio giving the very first demo of the Fmod engine on the 172, and I had put all this work into the sound engine. He just looked up at me and just said, "Sorry, Tom," because he never told me. Um, that being said, it's even to this day, it's still easier for us to use our own code and engine to put sounds in. It's faster that way, but it's still a little risky in the sense that now that X-Plane's using Fmod, and we're using a different sound engine, which is to say OpenAL, then we're going to run the risk of fighting with X-Plane. And this paradigm of X-Plane adopting technology over time is part of the reason the IXEG is where it is at the moment, where we had really leapfrogged X-Plane and Laminar's technology in a really large way. We customized an enormous part of their work. So it was only inevitable that as time passed and their stuff got more complex, and more complex, we started to have conflicts, and then that's kind of how we ended up where we are with this remodel. So to this day, that's the sounds really are the purview of Niels's creativity, his
Operation complete.
ear, his
Set parking
sound
brake.
sampling abilities, his synthesizing abilities, and then
Disconnecting
my
power.
job was just to
Stand
give him a
by.
nice software tool that he could combine those in the way that he wanted to.
And Tom, would you say that Laminar has been helpful throughout the journey, or is it that you do not interact much with them on such developments?
I've always interacted with him. Ben Supnick, one of the lead graphics programmers, when I was doing the MU2 way back in 2007, I mean, he invited me out unexpectedly. I didn't know him that well, to sleep on his couch to teach me a little bit about programming at the time. So they've always been very accommodating. I've known Austin for a lot of years. That being said, one thing about Laminar is they don't want to break people's add-ons, okay?
So
But
is
at the same
disconnected and
time,
bypass pin has been
they
removed. Hand
can't
signal on the right.
make their
We'll
own
see you next time.
product
Have a safe flight.
dependent upon the add-ons, right? In other words, they're like, our product has to stand on its own. In other words, they go into part of their business planning with the idea that, well, what if all the add-on, just disappeared today? Would would could xplane still be a complete product? So they've been very accommodating, well, extremely accommodating, but at the same time, they still kind of have to push their own agenda. And it is their foray into more complex airliners, which is to say the Airbuses that they've been working on, the 737, their 737-800, that's kind of got us here today. In other words, as they started to advance those airliners, they started to see their own shortcomings of their own systems that people like us had obviously exploited to do our add-ons. But then they brought on board Philip, who's just a really talented programmer. He goes back a lot of years to the VAS FMC product, actually, and he started doing a lot of intense airliner systems. We're talking the hydraulic systems, things of this nature. And what he found was, as he started to get into it, that Austin's model was just a little bit too simplified. So whereas Laminar's policy was, well, we don't like breaking other people's add-ons, so they didn't want to be changing, data ref names and some of the variables we use. It got to a point where they couldn't achieve what they wanted to unless they changed some things internally. And Philip was like, we just got to let some of these simple data refs go. And these were data refs that we depended on. So as their products evolved in complexity, then a lot of these data refs that we've been relying on for 10 years, systems that we had been relying on as being simple for 10 years, immediately got more complex, and then immediately broke a lot of our systems on the IXEG. So,
Tom, are you having any issues watching the stream? Just wondering.
no, not at all. No,
Okay,
not at all.
Because I'm just having issues. Then it must be my my iPad. All right.
Oh, yeah, I mean, everything looks fine on my end.
All right. Perfect.
So with xplane 12, which was their biggest of all, I think it was just a matter of what they've tried to do is increase their documentation. So rather than say, look, we've reached the point where we're going to have to change some things, then their way to handle that was, well, we're going to ramp up our documentation so add-on developers will at least have something to refer to. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today. So Laminar is very accommodating. We have a big developer chat that any add-on developer, and they can voice concerns and things of this nature. So, but there was a big paradigm shift from 11 to 12. Now that we've started to make the shift, and it's part of I think the IXEG's idea that I'm trying to get across to folks here today in a way, is that 12 knocked back a lot of developers, so we had to spend a lot of effort just getting caught up. But with any product that xplane's been around for I think 25 years, it's going to have what we'll call major remodels at some point in their lives, and I think that's kind of where we are, where we're like, let's start at xplane 12. Let's get a good foundation so we can continue to move forward.
Excellent. So I do have a question, and it is something I mentioned during my first impressions stream of the aircraft. Now, we are calling this aircraft the IXEG Classic Plus when we actually have removed some of the features, or at least features that people are accustomed to in the 737. I know that now you are bringing this back, which is the weight and balance and the rain effect, which I really miss, because I thought that it was probably the best rain effect I've seen on a flight sim add-on. So any thoughts on why we have named this Plus?
So I have to back up a little bit. When xplane 12 came out and knocked us back quite a bit, We had to spend an extraordinary amount of time to at least get it running. I mean, I don't know if you remember Osama. It wouldn't even run an X-Plane 12. It couldn't drop
Correct.
the flaps, and that was just the least of a lot of problems. So we had to spend quite a bit of time trying to get back. And so we internally sat and talked about what the future of the IXEG was and how we were going to handle it. So the idea was this was such a significant amount of work. We either going to have to terminate the IXEG at version 11. Uh, we just didn't see any way that was viable to go on. Two of the team members kind of went on with their lives. We're old guys, and two of the team members had to move on in their own lives. So that shrunk the size of the team that could do the work. So I suggested that to the team, and two of the guys, well, actually, none of the team members wanted that happen. They wanted to see it continue. So we came to an arrangement where they graciously gave up some of their stake in the IXCG so that I could try to keep it going. So then I kind of hatched a plan to say, well, if that's going to happen, I'm going to have to let go of some other work that I have. I don't know if a lot of people know I'm an engineer, and I take on a lot of contract work. That's just the nature of engineer. You do a job, and then when it's over, you're out of work again. So that's the life of engineering. So I wanted to do this full time, and we had to talk about it. We said, well, this is a lot of work. If we can do a small upgrade fee to help cover the cost of the work, then I think this would be enough for us to jumpstart this again full time and take it into the future and improve all the things we couldn't get. But as part of that process, when you start talking about charging for an update, people want to get something a little more tangible for their money, something a little more visceral. Because we were spending a lot of time under the hood fixing code and repairing code that nobody sees, I didn't like the idea of not having at least something that people could see. So that's when we said, well, let's go ahead and do the 3D cabin. That'll at least springboard one part of the sim that needs work, so that when we do a charge, that people will at least get something tangible for their money as well. So we had to differentiate it from the other one with a plus in some capacity to say that it's not the same product. There are other logistical reasons why, from an e-commerce point of view, that kind of had to be done that way. So the plus from the consumer side is probably mostly about, okay, the new GUI, the new interior, and probably that's about it. Whereas for us on the other side, it also handles some e-commerce difficulties, some database difficulties in that sense. Now, we knew that perception would be what it was going to be. As far as removing a few features, this would kind of be a longer conversation about what kind of features are easy to change versus which ones are not easy to change. So case in point, if you build a house, a lot goes into the infrastructure, which is say the mechanical, the framing, the foundation, and it doesn't really look pretty until you put on the final bits. So with regards to the weight and balance and some other things, Asana, the new GUI interface had to go in first. And once that's in, it's relatively easy to add things to it. So we had done our own custom interface, and the rain effect used the same type of technology, which is OpenGL. And as time went by and drivers changed, it became more and more risky. We were seeing more and more graphic anomalies, and we just said, well, we're going to have to change. And that's what gave rise to leaving the rain effect and also switching to the IM GUI. So we knew that once we did that, we could start adding in more interfaces more quickly. At the time, I didn't do those weight and balance calculations. So that's, if you want to know the reason why that was something Niels had done. So I took that code, I tabled it, and said, let me get the GUI in, let me get the basics in. Plus xplane has these new stations. So that means new data refs that I have to look up and things of this nature. So I said, let me get the GUI in, then I'll go back and I can study all those documents on weight and balance, and now I can start working on a weight and balance and load manager that we can then stick into the GUI. And that's where you've caught us today. So when I said, are we bringing that back in? The answer is, well, yes, I was reading those documents this morning on weight and balance, and I brought out that code and started writing in my plan. So I think we're going to get that back pretty quick so people are comfortable. But then because of the infrastructure, we're going to go quite a bit further in the future and start looking at more interactive GUI elements that we can put in, and not just checkboxes and sliders. So we want the interaction with the plane to be more enjoyable as well. So that's why we're here today with that
Excellent.
mission, but on the cusp of coming back for sure.
Excellent, excellent. All right, we are ready to go. We are at runway 19 right. So let's get the aircraft up in the air, and then we're going to talk a little more about this release. And there are a few more interesting questions. I think there was a message saying, I'm not sure the developers make money with the add-ons, not even when they are expensive. For my part, no problem to pay for an update. Interesting. Ooh, look at that.
Where's that? Oh, I see.
All right, let's take a look. All right, so we're clear. There are no incomings. Let's switch to astronomy view here. Look at how beautiful this aircraft is, guys. It's, you know, a lot of, when I look at the IXEG, it's very nostalgic for me because it reminds me of the time when I had just started with content creation on YouTube. And this aircraft has a very special place in my heart. All right, we are ready to go.
Osama, people say your mic has gotten quiet.
Oh, it did. All right, I think it's okay now. I'm not sure what am I doing that keeps bringing my mic. Is it okay now?
It's fine for me the whole time. So.
Oh, okay. I think it's just the.
Yeah.
I think it's the gain. All right. I think the mic should be okay. Ah, better. Okay, perfect.
There we go. Good.
All right.
Thank you, folks.
All right, here we go. Listen to those engine sounds, folks. Gotta love it. Airspeed alive. ADDONS check. V1 rotate. Positive rate of climb, gears going up. Oh yeah, listen to those sounds. All right, let's pitch down a little bit here, gain some speed. We are above 400 feet, VNAV.
That's nice looking scenery.
Yeah, it is. It's by Time Models. He does some really excellent scenery for xplane and Microsoft Flight Sim. All right, let's get the aircraft. All right, LNAV is on, and Command A is engaged. Put the landing gear in the off position. Auto brake is disengaged. Let's go to flaps 1. Here is a nice wing view. Lovely. Let's increase the... put this on about 40 nautical miles. We forgot our weather radar, so let's turn that on. And we continue the climb now through to our cruise altitude of 34,000 feet. The steam gauges are very nice. They're excellent. I love them. And thank you very much, guys, everyone in chat for being here. If I've missed any of your questions, may I ask the moderators to please repost the questions so that we can get them answered. Glenn, how are you? Glad to have you here. We've got also with us today Thrust Set Simulations, Adil, Sergio, Frank White, I am late to the stream. Did Tom talk about what's coming down the pike for the plane yet? No, he hasn't, but, well, here's the next question for you, Tom.
Oh, okay. That was the segue into the question. So, yeah, way back when obviously when we started, we had a vision of all the things that we wanted to put into it, and then we kind of realized how much work it was, and it didn't stop us from doing it. You just, you have all these bins of work that need to be done. Oh, here's 3D, here's texturing, here's quality control, and here's documents, and so. Kind of like anything else, you go to one column and you work on that for a little while, then you go to another column and you work on that, and you kind of bounce back and forth, depending on who's squawking the loudest. So we had pretty grandiose visions for it, still do. Technology got in the way of some, time got in the way of others, family. I don't like to use this phrase family in the way, but life. So some of the things that I want for it, and this will translate into things that are coming if nothing surprises us. So let's just go for me, myself, but what I wanted. And I'll get to the FMS last, so that's, we'll talk about that eventually. One of the things I've always wanted let's go with the high level stuff. First, I want it to be as high res as it can be without killing performance. So the new 3D exterior is going to be forthcoming at some point, and that means new liveries. And I know there's over 400 of them, so that's going to be a lot of painting for some people to do. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Osama, I'm sorry, but that's technology. We got hit by it, and I guess it's going to roll downhill to hit everybody else. But certainly we want to get the 3D. And I'm going to take this opportunity to say, some people wonder why we do 3D, why spend all the time on 3D. 3D does take a lot of time, but it's something that converges to the closer you can get reality, the longer it's going to last. A great example of this is if you get on like a Macintosh with a high retina display, it doesn't look any better or different than it does on a lower, like a 96 dot per inch monitor, unless you get 2 inches from the panel. And I like to say, if you're getting 2 inches from the panel, you need some glasses. And our market, that's just not our market. So what we're finding is that the screen has a certain limitation, and we take that into consideration to say, if we get the 3D to this level and it's incredibly high quality, we shouldn't have to touch 3D for a decade, and we can finally move on to other stuff. But if we focus, let's say, on FMS, if you look at, say, competing products or PMDG or somebody, as technology gets better and better, and other people say do high quality 3D, but they didn't spend all their time on systems or FMS, then your customer base is going to be going, oh, your product, it looks old, and now you have to start redoing the 3D, which is a very laborious process. So the idea with the cabin was, look, let's just get it out of the way. Let's get the exterior out of the way, and if I can do the exterior the way I want to, then I hopefully won't have to touch 3D for another decade. Yeah, so it's kind of like the cockpit. Niels did a really good job, and I don't really have to touch it, and it still looks great. So that's kind of why we focused on that. And with that done, then our attention goes to all the little bells and whistles that come to interact with a simulation on a computer, which is to say electronic flight bag things, flight planning. A little secret about me, I got into airliners because I'm not an airliner guy, because I was interested in learning about how to run an FMC. So I'm actually kind of this novice, and I want to offer integrated like tutorials and training where people can get in and through a GUI be able to learn how to fly the plane and have it teach them how to navigate and things of this nature. So I do envision a very robust 2D GUI, not as far as Sasso and Hot Start went. He developed a lot of those. He and I talk about that. He developed a lot of his graphics tools as a way to help him develop his models. But he comes from a graphics programming background, where I don't, as an engineer, I'm more of a systems guy. I don't do fancy GUI, so I've had to pick up this skill as I go, and I'm still trying to evolve it. So new 3D exterior. We're going to switch over to FMod for compatibility. I don't think it's going to affect the quality of the sounds. So what I'm going to do is I've written some some scripts that goes into all our code and pulls out all the parameters that Neil's programmed into the sounds. So in theory, I should be able to go into Fmod and program those sounds. I'll be using his same wave files. So with any luck, I think it's going to come out sounding about the same, but we are going to have, we will be able to do the left and right. OpenAL.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, the one thing you don't want to mess up with the IXEG is the sounds. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to. We will get a little bit of left and right, which I'm on the fence of. I've never been a big fan, but some people really love it, and it just has the way with our ears interpret. I mean, we know directionality, but we don't think about it. So the Fmod 3D exterior is going to be big. I'm going to put a lot of effort in the 2D GUI so that we can now do more visually immersive weight and balance, navigation, electronic flight bag stuff. And then the failures model, as crazy as it sounds, the reason I've held off on failures, I've had a great model for failures for years, a very interesting one, but it requires a pretty comprehensive GUI. And so maybe you guys are starting to see that. Until I have good 2D GUI tools at my disposal, I can't really bring to fruition some of the ideas we have with the failures. So the failures that we do have were just kind of large scale. And that was from Jan, who was telling me, as well as a pilot, Tom, you know, things either work or they don't. And once a bus goes down, all we care about is everything connected to that bus. So that's why we have the bus failures that we have. But the code underneath will support a lot more interesting failures, to the point where I had this crazy idea to do challenges once where people could try to figure out what was wrong. And so you could apply failures to individual components, and you could set them much like xplane does, where you could say, oh, I want it to fail this flight, fail in the next hour, or you know, fail some meantime before failure, make it completely random. So failures is something that's going to evolve over time, I believe. And then, of course, finally, the FMS, try to get that thing up to speed, too. So that's got a little story behind why it is the way it is and where it's going as well. So I think those are the big ones, Osama. 3D exterior, new FMS sounds, evolving 2D graphics to give us more interactivity. And then I want to see about getting some more training materials up for new customers, people like me who are trying to learn how to fly an airline.
That is excellent. That is very inspiring to hear, Tom. And there's a lot that you said today that I actually didn't know about, specifically about the development of an add-on, but more specifically about the IXEG. And I remember that it was in the making for a very long time. And back then, I remember I was actually traveling, and I sent you guys a message. I don't know who replied to me, but I said, look, if you guys need any help, let me know. And you said, well, I don't know who it was who replied, but the reply from the IXEG team was, well, thank you very much for offering your help. We do hope you enjoy the aircraft when it does come out. So that was something I still remember.
And everyone else.
Okay.
Q82.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you very much, Drishal, for your... Drishal's been a member for 11 months as a senior captain, and he thanks to Tom, Jan, and everyone else. Q82, well, thank you, sir, very much. We have a message from Maxim. Says, I have to try the IXEG on VR, and I have tried the IXEG on VR. It is amazing. The only difficult thing is to grab and move the speed bags. Is it possible to make a click spot to put the speed bags, or I guess speed bugs, automatic? So I think he's looking to have, he wants the speed bugs to be automatic in VR. So if there is a click spot to help with that.
Yeah, I don't know if he wants to put a request and put it on the forums, then we can take care of that. You know, that's not lost on us. We actually have an incredibly effective issue reporting system. It's, you know, a lot of times reporting bugs is a bit of a pain, but as John and I go through there and people make requests, as I develop here at home all day long, I keep a text file, and as soon as somebody requests something, I copy the URL, I put it into my web code, the same one people see online, and I just throw it in there with a link in it, and it takes me all of 10 seconds. So things like this, if you put it in forums, Jan and I would capture it, we throw it on a list, and then we sort it, and we absolutely see every one. They don't get forgotten. Once they kind of get recorded, they're going to be thought about at some point. So I would recommend, if that's his request. In fact, Jan did bring up something similar to that to me today. So I made note of it. It's on the issue. So we will probably look at that. Yes.
Thank you very much, Tom. Question from, we have 5 gifted memberships from Alex. Alex, thank you very much, sir. Guys, if you have received a gifted membership from Alex, please be sure to say thank you. Thank you again very much, Alex, for your kindness, your support. I appreciate it very much. Thank you all really for being here as well. And I'm sorry that I'm not really talking with chat today, but I am just really, I have just so many questions that are rushing through my head that I want to ask Tom, and I want to make sure I get to all of them before we conclude. We have a question from a real-world pilot. Again, says, what year did the IXEG originate in xplane? I think 2015, if I'm not mistaken, Tom?
It was 2016.
2016, okay.
And it was 6 years in development. So that's just because we were all part-timers. So to this day, I say Austin and PMDG's success early on kind of made everybody think that airliner development was a giant business. But xplane is niche in and of itself. And this one's definitely been a labor of love. And of course, Jan was a pilot. I had a lot of engineering contracts I was dealing with, and Niels and Morton never left their jobs. They ended up getting promotions and had to move on in their careers. So we were all just a bunch of enthusiasts driven by one goal. It's like we need a plane we feel like we're flying in, and that's what got us started. I'm the only one that's kind of done this professionally for a while. So as they moved on, I have been trying for years to let go of all my other commitments so that I could work in xplane full time. And I have to say, Osama, xplane 12, after, let's see, I think 2005 is when I started developing for xplane. And I have to say, xplane 12 is finally the version that gives me all the tools that I've been wanting since 2005. First it was shadows.
Wow.
First it's like, I need some shadows. And then it was, I need some custom sound. And then it was, I need real lights that will light things up. I need a new lighting, and I need light texture ability. And slowly but surely, I added these things one by one. And then when I kind of saw them start working on xplane 12, I thought, wow, we finally have the real-time, PBR that we've been dreaming of forever. Which of course, actually wasn't made for, but now we're attempting to. It's like, well, let's start the remodel process and bring it into the, modern times and take it even further. And that's what we're trying to do.
Another question comes from Hector. He's asking, is there any chance to get back the pop-up menu views? It is an excellent tool to get a bunch of views. I believe he's speaking about, when you move them. Earlier you had the presets, the camera views. When you move your mouse, you hover your mouse, I think, to the bottom of the screen. I think that's what he's referring to.
That is not on the roadmap currently. I could give it some thought. The reason why we let that go is at the time, xplane only had one view, W, and that was it. But somewhere along the line, after we had released it, or maybe right before, xplane came out with saved views as well, using the keypad, control keypad. And that was a pretty fast, Jan started using it first, and then he started using it for all his views, and he didn't use the view palette anymore. So when xplane came out with that, it conceptually took away the reason that we put it in the first place. And it does have some OpenGL drawing overhead, so we elected to let that go. We haven't found too many, granted, our situation's limited. In other words, you know, there are 1,000 people with 1,000 different configurations, and we can't always imagine uh, a situation. But people come to us all the time and said, "Hey, that's great, but hey, I'm in VR and I do this, and I can't change my view." So we're not opposed to it. It's not front and center. It's just one of these things where I have to give it a second thought, because actually, fly-out menus, believe it or not, are somewhat problematic in VR and multi-monitors, because you know, we rely on the left edge of the screen. Well, if you have multi-monitors, you know, every user can set their monitors differently, one on the right, one on the left, and all of a sudden, you know, the left edge isn't always exactly the left edge that you think it is, and it can end up creating more headaches than it's worth, which is why we try to use commands and toggles. If we heard a really good use case for it, then we'd consider it. There's nothing wrong with it, but most people are pretty comfortable with the keypad um, saved views in xplane. So I'm on the fence. It's not front and center, but a good enough case, I'll certainly consider it again, or some variant thereof. But I do think xplane's default camera system is pretty good. So.
Yeah, I think to your point, Rashad makes an interesting comment. He says, honestly, the default camera system is good in xplane, and therefore I don't think it needs to be reinvented in this add-on. I'd rather that the time and resources are, you know, used elsewhere, which is probably a sensible thing to do, Rashad. I agree with you, definitely. One thing that always comes to mind, Tom, with add-ons, and this is not specific to the IXEG, but I think the community, when an add-on comes out and it is priced at, let's say something is priced at $80, okay, and I know the IXEG is priced at $84. I've gone into a similar question to one of the other developers as well about his aircraft and why was the aircraft so expensive, and that in my review, of course the IXEG is an exception to that because it's got exceptional sounds, exceptional textures. The depth of system simulation is not bad. Again, it is a well-developed add-on, and that brings me to another question, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But in terms of the actual pricing of add-ons, I understand there are sometimes license fees that you guys have to pay. There is obviously the distributor, in your case X Aviation, who also takes a cut, and then there is a little bit of funds that ends up to the developers who develop the plane. Can you very briefly explain the economy of that? How does that work? How do you actually arrive at the pricing that you arrive at? Is it how many hours, or is it what makes business sense, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's definitely a business sense. So anybody who's maybe a businessman kind of understands it. It starts off with our historical data. When we first started, we had no idea what the market would bear. So that, you know, that's always the unknown, is the market size. So, for example, if you had a really, you know, market for some, you know, bespoke, handmade, you know, sports car, you'll get a, you know, Corvette that's in America here, and it's pretty good, and it'll run 100,000 because it's mass produced, and then you get some handmade, like, you know, Koenigsegg or something, and it's, you know, 5 or 6 million because their market's not as big. It's a similar dynamic here in flight sim. X-plane's always been a smaller market. So when we got started, we really weren't sure what to expect. What we do know is that obviously as consumers, and this is something I have to reiterate, you know, I'm a consumer as well. I have these same thoughts for other products that I buy. The consumer's minds do make a correlation between a certain level of features and a price. So we had to start somewhere when it came out. So when we did the IXEG in particular, we said, okay, well, you know, we've got a certain level of fidelity that think is competitive with PMDG in some level. This is what people are used to saying and are paying. So let's start there. And then we did that, and of course we had a pretty good stack of costs. That is what people don't say. I would have to say in this line of work, the most surprising cost to most people they wouldn't understand until they did it is high bandwidth professional e-commerce services, right? If if we offered a free product that was 200 megabytes to download and 1,000 of those were downloaded, that would not be a cheap cost. The provider doesn't care if we're selling products or not. Every byte that gets downloaded, X-Aviation gets charged for. So that was a surprising cost to me. We had that discussion internally, and I was satisfied with the data that I got out of that. So as it turned out, when you have a team, like any business, we look at our overhead costs. We have, a team of this many size. We don't get paid by the hour. We only get, it's like being a writer. You only get you only get paid when it comes out. You don't know how well it's going to do. It could be a dud. So given that data, after the IXEG came out, we started to form, we keep a pretty good database of sales patterns to gauge the market. We don't get numbers from Laminar, financial numbers, but a lot of times we will get sales volume, which of course we can extrapolate, but that's neither here nor there. They're very open about how big the market is. And from that, we could kind of start to make parallels about, how much is my time worth? A lot of people do things out of passion, and I'm sure, what is it? People who are getting into the business of professional pilots, having to fly regionals, can attest. I just paid $70,000 for my education to get paid $24,000 a year. It's very much passionate. I think flight simming is the same way. So, yeah, we try to balance what people are used to pay with features we think that we're offering to be competitive, and let's just say that's what the market will bear. But until the sales come through, we really don't know how well we're going to do. So the choices that we're making now are based on cost and sales volume that we think could sustain, my business model, which is to say, hey, I need to make enough money to live. And I'll be honest with you, it is passion. I could probably make a lot more as an engineer, but I love doing this. I love the people that I work with, and I want to try to continue it. So the price point that we arrived at is kind of based on what people are used to pay for the market, and then we have to somehow put in enough quality to generate the volume to break even. Now, I say break even because I'm not this expanding business where, hey, I need to buy a new office, or hey, I need to, we want to. What I'm buying for myself and the IXEG team is basically time. I need to pay the bills while I'm doing what I love. It's a win for me, and it's a win for the customers as long as I can keep doing it. So that's kind of where we ended up at the price. I think that if we there is an unknown in the business world, and it's risky. If we say let's lower the price, maybe we'll get more sales. We have not seen that to be true. It seems like a logical argument, but we've kind of been down that road, and we've talked to other people about it. And then once you lower your price, then usually you can't go back. And if it doesn't work, it'll put you out of business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's how we
sense.
do it. The goal is to not. Obviously, as a consumer, gouging is not in my blood. My parents didn't raise me that way. So before I got into this, I knew what I was willing to pay, and it's funny. I think I look at that. I'm like, well, if they're going to pay this much, then they're going to get two things. Hopefully, I'll give them a certain level of quality, but they're also going to get, continued development and support. So there are causes that I support. I can't think of, like crowdsourcing, where people are willing to pay for things they haven't kind of got yet, in the promise of getting it. And so that sounds probably not coming across well. What I'm trying to say is that I'm very good at support. I'm very good at support. I've been around for 20 years, and customers of my MU2 will know. I think that hit the market in 2009. Here we are at 23, and it's still being updated. So if there's one thing that I pride myself in, is being very reliable. So when we decide on the price, I try to give them a certain amount where they can enjoy it, and I also like the idea of giving them something to look forward to for several years to come. I personally like that, and so I kind of developed my business model in that way. I said, well, if I enjoy a developer of that type, maybe there'll be other people who will I could resonate with, and they'll enjoy the product as well. So that's the model that I take.
Excellent. So a couple of questions, Tom. I know that, for example, now that you've explained things to me, it's very clear. I'm not sure what's going on with my mic today. I keep losing the gain on the mic for some reason.
It seems automatic. It fades out as if it was an automatic setting. Just that
Yeah, there is something just on. Why is it doing that? I'm not sure why it's doing that today. It's acting very funny. So I understand now that some of the team has left, and obviously that has put in a lot of burden on you and the rest of the team working on the project. But I recall when the upgrade to xplane 11 took a very long time. Updating the xplane 11 version also took a very long time, and coming to xplane 12 took also an extremely long time. Probably one of the last add-ons to make it to xplane 12. Now I understand that you're doing this part-time, but for everyone in the community, so they can understand and sort of set their expectations in terms of how much updates they can expect now with the IXEG moving forward. I think that is something that needs to be addressed to the community, just considering the update history of the aircraft over the years.
Sure. Let me correct you on one point. I'm not doing this part-time. I'm doing it full-time.
Oh, you are doing it full-time now. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Starting with the MU2, this was an effort to become full-time to solve some of these problems. So I've been doing this full-time for a little over a year, right about now, trying to get to this point. So I'll go ahead and explain. Recalling that the IXEG was a part-time endeavor at the time, the thing about my career as an engineer, when you do projects, you sign contracts and you have deliverables, and that is your first. That's what pays the bills, and you're legally obligated to individuals. So, depending when contracts run out, I'd have to go out and find a new job and a new contract, and just like anybody who's familiar with that line of work, sometimes you'll get a really good contract, but it's going to tie you up for quite a long time. This was in. It was kind of it didn't do well for IXEG development, and that was the main reason for the gaps in development with the original IXEG. Kind of started out as a hobby or as our own endeavor, and then when we got in, real life got in the way. And we know that was a problem. So as 11 went and I got more committed, then of course, as you know, COVID just kind of threw a monkey wrench into a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure.
So at that time, I was involved in a project with some investors to develop some flight sim training software, and made commitments to them, but that kind of fell out. And when that happened, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there with families, so hopefully they can understand. These are real world issues when you have kids. I have 4 kids, and they were finally moving on, getting married. Yeah, they were moving on, getting married, and I was trying to get them all in my house and things of this nature. And around 2020, all of that kind of started to happen at the same time. COVID kind of killed the opportunity to give me a lot of time. My kids had moved on out of the house, and I talked to my wife and said, I want to kind of make a go at this xplane. It's what I'm truly happy doing. Would you have a problem with it? And of course she said no. She's always supported me in all these endeavors. So I got together with Cameron on X Aviation. We talked about it and what it would take to happen. And, we knew the kinds of challenges we had in the past, and we knew what kind of customer responses we had. So the idea was, well, if we do this, we have to keep moving. To your point, the team is smaller. However, there are efficiencies that we have that we didn't have before. So, for instance, we were developing code from scratch. We were learning systems. I was learning FMS systems. I was learning so there was an enormous amount of upfront investment when we did this aircraft. So, for instance, I have an entire API library for my electronics, my electrical systems, my hydraulic. I don't have to rewrite those. There's easily 18 months worth of code that I don't have to redo. So that was another reason for the long development time with this infrastructure. So when I sat down with Cameron, the idea was, hey, I have a lot of code, I got a lot of infrastructure. I could probably 3D model faster than anybody, so that's not a problem. And now that I got this code and this experience, I think I can do this. I don't want to say solo because, like I said, Jan test flies these things. I really am the guy turning the wrenches. Jan tells me what to do, and I do it. So armed with these kinds of assets, which is to say a really good code library, a lot of experience, the tools, I can't really stress, Osama, how much the tools have changed. Blender was officially adopted by Laminar, and when they switched over to, I want to say, version 2.8 and introduced collections, it changed everything with the way we do 3D, and I would say cut the development time by 2/3. For me, what used to take 3 hours, I can now do in an hour. So that was a huge, huge change, and that's when I jumped onto the MU2 and said, let me redo that. And as you notice, it's a completely new 3D exterior. So I did that one relatively quickly. So then we came up with a plan and said, yes, we can do that. I can make this a go, but I'm going to have to get the 737 out, and it'll probably have to be a paid upgrade because it's going to eat a year of my time without pay. I'm going to have to invest myself to make this happen. So that's what I did. And so let's get the MU2 out of the way because I don't want to throw it away. And it's a springboard for some of my software. So I said, let's do that. That'll springboard me, and then I'll jump into the IXEG with Jan. And I can't stress enough that 2 of our team members, when they left, gave up their stake because they didn't want to see it go away. So I'm eternally grateful to those guys. If they hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been here. We would have declared the IXEG dead. So they wanted to see it continue, as did I. So we hatched the plan together, and that's what we did for a year. So from your perspective, you're like, you've been doing, but for a year, I sit here in this little bitty office in my upstairs, and would just 3D model just all day, build my code, swap my code. The MU2 went out, and then of course we elected to do the 3D interior, so some folks would have some value. And then here we are today. I consider this the foundation to now spring ahead for all the things that we need to finish up, which is to say the FMS, because I know we're going to have this discussion pretty soon. So I'm sure people would love to hear about it. So.
Wow. Well, by the way, folks, I do have a picture of Tom's office. I'm going to share it with you guys a little later after the stream. Here comes an interesting question, and there was an interesting comment on that question. Any plans to bring the IXEG? I'm not sure what was wrong with my mic today. Are there any plans to bring the IXEG 737 to Microsoft Flight Sim?
No, there's no plans. It's not that we didn't look. When Microsoft announced, a lot of us, which to say us at X Aviation and even Sasso, who's a really talented programmer, we dug into their API pretty early and said, okay, is this where we need to go? And to this day, we still kind of keep an eye on it, but it is a completely different paradigm. And all I can say today is no. I'm still of the opinion. I have a couple of friends. Before Microsoft announced, I'd made a lot of friends with developers who had come over to xPlane that I still stay in touch with. And when Microsoft came out, they went over to work for some of those developing houses, and a couple of others, and I would stay in touch with them about the API and how are things going over there. And so I still stay in touch with them. But at the end of the day, I am one of these guys that says, xPlane it feels different, and it gives us tools that Microsoft still doesn't give us to do the things that we want to do with regards to immersion. Now, 3D fidelity, geometric and lighting fidelity, obviously they've got it nailed. So something can look as good in Microsoft, that's a no-brainer. But as far as doing the little nuances of being in a sim, the tiny animations with the efficiency that we can do in xPlane, I think we can achieve more fidelity with less effort in xPlane, and I'm personally happy there. So no, there are no plans to bring it to Microsoft. The API is different. We would lose an extraordinary amount of time learning that system that we could use to just continue. xPlane sales have done really well, according to Laminar, one of their best yet, so we believe that the market is healthy. And like anything, Microsoft has a field. There's nobody who probably doesn't love their scenery for VFR flying. But I do find there's a lot of people that really enjoy the immersive field that X-Plane's always kind of been known for, where they
I'm
stick the
one of them.
frog nut, and I'm one of them too. So, based on that, I'm like, well, I'm gonna stick here, because we are. I do have two other models that I want to get started. I'm going to cap it at 4 because support gets to be pretty heavy, and I don't want to isolate any one of my children, for lack of a better term. So I think I'm going to stick around here for a while.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Wow, that's very inspiring. Hearing just all the things that you've said, you've kind of it was a very educational thing for me to. Very inspiring, very educational. There's a lot of things that you said that I personally did not know, whether it's about you, the development, X-Plane. Let me ask you this question, because I've kind of always wondered, what is X-Plane like in terms of a, from a software perspective? I've been hearing things about some developers that under the hood, X-Plane is not really a very well-written software.
I would question what particular aspect that they're referring to, because I can't really answer questions. That's like saying, oh, that's not really a good car. Well, there's a lot of facets and diversity to that. So I'd be curious as to what they were talking about first. Yeah, I don't suppose you happen to know that?
I think just how the code is written, that it's not a clean code, that it's not optimized, that sort of thing.
I really can't speak to that. My world in programming is very, very small. The complexity that they deal with. I've known Ben for a long time. He goes to SIGGRAPH every year, and I am privy to some of their developer. I am privy to a lot of their developer talk. I did the ALIA for Laminar in Austin, so I'm just enough in the loop just for support, where I get to see him talk about things that are so far over my head with regards to programming, graphics especially, that I'm pretty amazed at the amount of complexity that goes into it. Now, what I will say, now Austin's an aeronautical engineer, and I like to have this saying that you have programmers who program a certain topic or a certain area, but then you've got let's say you got programmers who are programming engineering stuff, but then you got engineers who will program. And Austin was one of these guys where, I'm an engineer, so I'm going to write a program, but he was by no means a professional software programmer. And Ben, who is a professional software programmer, is the one who came in and basically righted X-Plane's ship. But in doing so, had to rewrite a lot of Austin's code. And a lot of Austin's code, I think, is still legacy to this day, but I think it's such a small subset of the simulation itself, is the flight model. You have, the system simulation can be broken up into all sorts of things. You got the hydraulics, the electrics, the jet, they're all kind of independent of each other, and there's different individuals writing on it. So I can't speak to that, Osama. I know that the ALIA work probably is single-handedly responsible for most of our frustrations with the flight model. I do believe Austin had a lot of approximations and heuristics for some level of flight dynamics that when he got working on ALIA, he really deep dove into the aeronautics once again. At one point he thought it was mature, but then when ALIA started, he went back down into it because he had all these interesting, VTOL and interacting prop washes that he did, and he started playing with it again. And when he did, it changed a lot of the aeronautical, and that probably upset a lot of people. And whether or not that code's efficient or not, I can't speak to. All I can tell you is, if Jan says it flies good, then it flies good. And he's the hardest one to please of all. If something's not right, it's only because we haven't quite got to it. Flight testing takes a really, really long time. And Jan's pretty, he's responsible for a lot of that. So I can't speak to it exactly, Osama. I don't know what they're talking about. I love it. I have a good time. It looks great. I don't get any stuttering on my end. If other people have something that's hurting them, I can't speak to that.
Yeah. Well said. And can we expect in later versions of the IXEG that, for example, the circuit breakers are modeled, holds, failures, how in-depth will the failures be? Are we going to see something similar to the, for example, the Challenger 650? Or is it, is it going to be basic?
Yeah,
I know you mentioned something about the failures.
yeah, the code base supports that. We were on the fence about circuit breakers. I have a little point of pride. Probably before you got in it, I did this Falco. It's an experimental aircraft, and I simulated all the breakers. I think that was 2009, so I think I was the first one to simulate that. And we thought about it, but it was, we talked to Jan about it, and he said, well, we just never mess with it. Yeah, there were a few procedures, but they were so few and far between. We just decided that that wasn't the practical use case. But of course, we could talk all day about, our proclivity as humans to be, what have you done for me lately? And we need new things to play with. So the code base supports it. It wouldn't be hard for me to basically pick an instrument and then just run it through a virtual circuit breaker. And, if you pull it, it stops working. So I do simulate every single bus. Just about every equipment references the bus for power. So it's just a matter of going into code and slipping in a circuit breaker in between that code and say, if it pulls the breaker, it's not going to happen. So I'm undecided about if we'll do all the breakers. That being said, what I do think, and this is just brainstorming and conjecture on my part, what I could see is sitting down with Jan and saying, hey, there's a couple of challenging scenarios that I think would be fun for people to try. And then we would look up emergency procedures for that and say, okay, that involves pulling this breaker, and then starting with those breakers and then making those known to individuals. As far as the failures with, let's say the Challenger has, like I said, the code I think supports it. What I need is a GUI interface to put on it. And I have, in fact, I wrote the algorithm for the failure interface almost a decade ago, and it's just been sitting around, where my idea was to fail really challenging elements that you would have to have the circuit diagram to diagnose. And then the idea was, so now we're just daydreaming, we're product concepting, but the idea was, hey, I want to see people have a failure, let them try to solve it. If they don't, then they're going to have to land, and they can pull up a maintenance report, and then it can explain to them what was wrong. And I don't think I'm going to get into the economics of it the way Sasso has. Every product has in a way, we develop products for ourselves. That personally doesn't interest me. As an engineer, I'm like, it would be interesting to know what might have broken on an airplane. So, for instance, I do simulate a lot of relays, switch gear down in the bows of the airplane, and you have one of those things break. You get really odd behavior that you just can't tell. You have to actually turn on and off other systems to try to figure it out, and that's only if you knew the diagram in the first place. But I did think about having crazy ideas where it's like, hey, let's put a failure together where we'll give people the option to let us initiate failures remotely, and then if they can guess which component broke, we can give them an award of some type. And so these are the kind of ideas we have that I thought would be fun, but I need an interface to manage all that stuff. The model exists, but the interface to manage it doesn't. So now that I've kind of built these bodies of code for my electrical and hydraulic, and being a small team, you can maybe you can see a little bit easier now why things might be a little better for you as customers, where I can say, okay, now I'm going to start building up my 2D graphics GUI code, and when I do that, now I can start putting in these interfaces and things of this nature. And this is why I'm trying to I find the future for myself more encouraging, that I can finally get to the polish that I want to put on it. So yes, for failures, absolutely. I've always wanted to do that because the code supports it. I can fail some really interesting stuff. And it was fun to watch Jan think things were broken, and me, myself, thinking, no, I fixed that. Why didn't I fix it? And realized that I'd turned off a switch that had cut off some virtual relay and kept something from running. That was always a lot of fun. And then when that gets developed, I'm really big on documentation, so I'm starting to invest in more web infrastructure so people can go to the website to get information. But we can also put tutorials, and eventually Jan, I think, is going to get back to, once we get the FMS where we want it to be. Jan's going to start doing tutorials again to help newbies learn how to fly this thing and fly more challenging scenarios. So,
Excellent. Wow, that's really exciting. That's really, really exciting.
Well, yeah, and it's taken me a while. Now, we might as well, because I see you're kind of coming in for descent. We can address the whole FMS story, and it's a little bit of a story, and I like to talk anyways, so might as well.
Sure, yeah. There was one question. I think someone was asking about it says, don't let Tom leave without some mention of the Plan 717.
Oh, we'll finish that up right at the end. Oh, hey, I'll before I do that, give me a second. So the 717, we already let out the door. This will be a fun question for everybody, I guess. I do have one other one I want to do. I'm not going to say after that, because now that I'm doing this full time, it's not a joke. I'll sit here for 11, 12 hours a day, and I'll rotate. I'll get tired of working on one thing, and I tell myself, well, as long as I'm working on a product for X-Plane, then my time here is valuable. So I do have a fourth product that I have already started. It does, obviously, it's behind all the IXEG stuff, and but because I have these code bases, I can work on multiple products at once with one code base. So I do have a product, and I describe it as the love child of the 737-300 and the MU2, which are my two products. If those two planes got together and had a baby, then this is the one that I would like to do. So if they can spit that one out, that would be a funny question. So we'll get to the 717 later. FMS work. So the FMS has actually got an interesting story about kind of how that is and why it's a little bit of a thorn. When we started IXEG, there were 5 of us, one of them doing the FMS. And as we got into it, we wanted to do dual CDUs where you could enter information on the right and the left. And I don't believe anybody was doing that. PMDG, I think, was mirroring at the time. So we said, well, we want dual CDUs, dual FMSs. And the individual that we were working with, he didn't start out his code that way, and he was very reluctant to do that. Jan, being Jan, just found that to be unacceptable and kept pushing, and we ended up parting ways with that individual amicably, but we just wanted to have the dual CDU and push the limit on that. So when that happened, this individual was using the nav data set at the time, which is the XML set that we still have to this day. And so we stuck with it, and I think PMDG was using it at the time, so we wanted to kind of stay relevant with it. But now we didn't have anybody in the team that knew anything about programming and FMS. So Niels, the uber versatile artist, started with it and did the interface, hand built the font and made sure the screen looked good and all that cool stuff. And so he started going down that road because I was in the middle of doing the 3D, I think, hydraulics and electric at the time. So I was quite busy. As we started to get in further and Neil started doing the sound, he ran into some challenges doing that. Niels is an artist who has a technical side. I'm a technical guy who has an artistic side. And he took it about as far as he could go, and then handed it over to me. And so I ran with it because as an engineer, I was a little bit more comfortable with some of the mathematics behind it. So I started to run with it, but I had never used one. So we focused on what we call nominal behavior. Didn't do the abnormal stuff, but I was pretty newbie I didn't know anything about VNav. I wasn't comfortable with, navigation or the kinds of, putting in one route and then having to switch later, which ended up being the problem. I always had good luck. So one of the keys to having the IXEG fly a decent VNav now is, well, put in your one route, just don't change it. And actually it flies that extremely well. And you'll notice a lot of Jan's videos, that's what he does. So it's when you would start putting in changes that it would have its problems, because now we have discos and the data set had a few limitations. And I was pushed to my limit on it. And to be honest, I struggled with it quite a bit at the time. So it just kind of came to the point where it was do or die. and we had to get it out, and so we did, and it left holes in that. But like anything else, once you start getting experience, it starts to sink in. You understand it, and you go back at your code, and you think, well, what was I thinking? Why did I do it that bad? And you have all this clarity in hindsight. And so I was able to go back and patch up some of the more obvious stuff, but not the VNAVs or the holes at the time. And the reason the holes, ironically, the reason the holes stopped is at the time I remember asking the question. I had a procedural hold working. And I said, I'd asked John, so when you enter a hold, does the route just display the hold, or does it actually draw the entry pattern, like a teardrop or something? And so you'd be surprised. They didn't know because they hadn't flown holds in so long. And I ended up getting with I was on a Southwest Airlines flight sitting next to a guy who was, he was a pilot, and he was just on a hop, and I asked him, and he didn't know either. So I had obviously in the LNAV, I'd had a lot of code that could handle turns and automatic drawing of turns and calculations, but I could never get a solid answer. Sorry, I hope I'm not interrupting you in your landing. I could never get a solid answer, so I just kind of left it hanging for the longest time, and we focused on other things, and it's kind of been outstanding. So that's how we kind of got there with the FMS, and the thought was, well, it needs a pretty heavy rewrite to take all that stuff in advance. And once you start writing code like that, it's months and months and months. So if I did that and we tried to release it for 12 and it looked like something out of version 10, then that would be pretty bad as well. But as mentioned, 3D takes a lot longer. So once I get into the FMS, it could be that you could fix something in a matter of 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. Jan reports it, I go in, I find a bug, and we can clean that up. So I've kind of left it for last because I know that once I get to it, I could probably make relatively quick strides on it, but not having to go back and do the 3D is kind of a big weight off my chest. I know I'm getting to the point on the project where all I have to do is start coding. If I had coded all that and we had this huge hulking 3D that was from version 10, nobody would want it either. It would be called a dinosaur in Legacy, and it looked like something out of version 10. So it was just for these very reasons that we decided to try to get the 3D out of the way and get it to where the last thing we were going to do is to just focus on programming the GUI, and so I could sit in front of the computer all day long and type, because I could do that for hours. And that's pretty close to where we are now. The 3D exterior is not going to be as bad as people think. That's the kind of thing I do. Wake up in the morning, I'll do that for an hour and a half, or I'll do it in the evenings. But when the business hours start, with this release and some of the bugs dying down, I am now at the point where the bulk of my day is going to sit down and start looking at the GUI and the FMS, and I'm going to start that journey.
Well, I'll tell you, Tom, so during my initial impression stream, I really wasn't sure whether the $84 price tag was worth it for somebody who does not own the plane, somebody who's just going to come and buy it. But after listening to everything that you had to say today, and just really getting the perspective on the economics of add-on development, I think that price is probably a justifiable price, even if somebody does not own the plane, and they're not, obviously the price for the update is a very small price for those who own the aircraft since day one. And I think I think the more recent buyers get it absolutely free of charge for the upgrade. But I think the IXEG 737 remains to be, although not a lot of new stuff comes to it in this specific version for XPlane 12, but just the fact that it works in XPlane 12 is just makes me happy. I'm happy that
if there was one message, so I've done this a long time, and the one thing I hope people can understand, at least when they buy a product from me, is the support. So if they buy it and something's not viable, I have watched people buy it and they had valid complaints, and somehow they're like 5 years later after we fix something, they're like, "Oh, I love this thing. I've been doing it for 5 years," and with no upgrade price. I think I supported the MU2 for 10 years without charging for it. And I really do balance out. I say, well, I don't want to gouge people. I do need to make a living. I'm not out to buy a Ferrari like Austin does or things of this nature. But he's successful just by sheer volume. Plus he is. So I'm not going to knock that. But I do this because I love it, and I think when people support and buy it, then I am trying to do this full time now, and I've got a couple other products I want to develop. So I think that's one thing people will get from me is just longevity out of it. So if it doesn't have exactly what they want, they can be sure that I'm still working to put it in there. So I'm excited about getting on the FMS and the GUI stuff. That's where all the fun eye candy can be.
Well, that's excellent. I'm not sure if you guys want me to do a replay. Maybe we can attempt to do a replay. XPlane always just fails when I do the replay, but let's see if we can get it to work today. We'll see.
Replay's always been a sore spot.
Yeah.
And just so people know, they wonder why that is. The way XPlane does is when they do replay.
It's kind of crashed now.
Replay's always been a sore spot with everybody, even Laminar. I got in there and asked them how do they do it once, some other things, and they just kind of didn't like that answer. They XPlane tracks so many variables. When they do replay, they only have a certain subset. They make the assumption that people are going to do it to rewatch external landings because it's fun and cool. It's not a I can't remember, there's a name. It's not a FOCA device where you're designed to analyze your aircraft systems, right? That's it's hard enough to calculate everything in real time, much less replay it in real time. So they select a certain subset of variables and data ref that they replay. So we customize so much. What we try to do is we try to drive all our custom off of those data refs so that when those replay, ours will replay, but we just can't catch all of them. So we tried customizing our own system, but then we were recording data, a lot of data at 30 frames a second, just so we could replay it. And it was causing performance issues. And if you didn't replay it, then you weren't getting the benefit of that work, but it was costing you in performance. So it was just, replay's been a developer. So we've kind of adopted the idea of we're certainly going to try to play everything you can see and hear in an exterior view of a landing and replay. That's what drives us. And then if we can add stuff, then we do.
Well, that's excellent. That's excellent. I'm very glad to hear that, and very glad to hear that this project is pretty much alive and that you are dedicated to it. And I think that's very important, I think, for the community, because we know, at least I do know, that this was kind of a side project when it first started, and you guys did an amazing job. And I know IXEG, I think the E in the IXEG refers to some engineering, if I'm not mistaken. So I know you guys were engineers, and, you had your, completely different, different jobs, and this was just a hobby for you. So it's very nice that you are actually full-time on this now. That gives, I think, a lot of confidence to the community that this project is now going to get, the full attention and a lot of love along the way, as we've been able to witness today on this live stream. Tom, I want to...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I was saying, and that's the support's kind of really important, and that's kind of my promise to everybody. If we do really well, not if we really do well, I think I'm already committed here to certainly get the FMS and going. But with good support, I'm excited about doing some other things. I didn't want to get away without segueing into the 717 before we upset a few people. So.
Excellent. Well, Tom, I really want to thank you very much for being with us this evening. It's been an inspirational and educational talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't pay much attention to chat today, so sorry, guys. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the stream. You've enjoyed the information that Tom has very kindly shared with us about the development of the aircraft, about his history with the development, his life in general, and everything there is to know about the IXEG. It's been a lot of fun. Tom, thank you very much. I truly
Thank you.
appreciate it.
No, we're glad you're here in the community as well. Um, keeping the focus on what xplane has to offer for everybody.
xplane has been
You're
my
welcome,
favorite
Alan.
sim all along, I think. And even with Microsoft Flight Simulator coming, although I have to say that I really like Microsoft Flight Sim, especially when I'm doing VFR flying, I still find xplane to be the more fulfilling simulator when it comes to getting a feel of the aircraft and really experiencing those big airliners. The flight model, I think, in xplane is second to none, if you
Yeah,
ask
I've
me.
never been one of those to take sides. Each one has something, and I mean, I think I'm very practical in that regards. I gravitated to xplane because it had something that I didn't get out of Microsoft in one particular area. But then obviously Microsoft has things that xplane doesn't get, and at the end of the day, I'm the type of individual that says, well, I use the one for whatever I'm hoping to get out of the sim session on that day. Fortunately, I get more than one day to play with this stuff, so I can go back and forth.
Excellent. Well, folks, this pretty much brings us to the conclusion of our live stream today. Once again, a sincere thanks to Tom for taking the time to come and speak to you guys. Tom, again, thank you very much. Thank you
My
guys
pleasure.
for being here. And until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. And I will see you all very soon. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and bye-bye for now.